Look at the picture. See the skull. Visible Frankenstein controls. The Brain Thoughts broadcasting radio. The Frankenstein earphone radio. The latest new skull reforming to contain all Frankenstein controls.
All right, everyone. Welcome to a tentative new endeavor from the Frankenstein Control family of podcast entertainment. We're going to try something a little bit different tonight. It's different from our usual show format, different from our Let's Plays and Taylor's art streams. This is something I've been considering for quite a while as a personal passion/vanity project, but recently I did receive some interest for doing this sort of thing that I did not shamelessly solicit myself. So, that being said, I'll give it a shot. If people want to hear it, I'm down for that. I am going to try reading for you in installments in an audiobook-like format, and I'll go into detail just what I mean by that in just a minute. None other than Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian or The Evening Redness in the West. Before we get into it, there's a few disclaimers I'd like to make, not least of which is my due diligence in establishing that this is a copyrighted piece of literature. It was actually copyrighted originally in 1985 by Cormac McCarthy, all rights reserved, published in the United States by Vintage Books, a division of Random House. I did know it was Random House, I just didn't know the exact pedigree of the literature, so there's that out of the way. That being said, if you are at all interested or captivated by the experience to follow, I would strongly encourage you to consider purchasing and reading your own copy of the book. In addition to the incredible journey that is reading Blood Meridian yourself, because there's lots to be conveyed in the phonetically written dialogue and spellings that I will not be able to do justice to. I will also not be giving you a fully complete experience with this project. I will be selectively editing and omitting certain passages and words at my discretion as we go along. This is what I meant by audiobook-like. These passages and words are crucial to absorbing the entirety of the picture Cormac McCarthy wanted to paint, and in no way would I approve of their censorship. I merely do not wish to release to the internet, the merciless internet, a recording of my own voice saying some of these things.
Yeah.
Seems like the kind of thing that can haunt you forever. This brings me to my next point. This heavily researched work of historical fiction takes place before the American Civil War, and the racial attitudes of characters within reflect this. You will be exposed to racist depictions and sentiments. However, the reason I love this book so much is because it exists to call bullshit on all of the feeble and petty philosophies of humankind, racism definitely included. Many times characters will display a racist interpretation of the behavior of others, only to engage in the same behavior or worse themselves, with the irony lost on them but meant to be apparent to you. McCarthy seems to aim, in part, to show how all of humanity is exactly equal to one another, with none superior save by delusion. However, the sum total of what we all are isn't good. This is a deeply nihilistic piece of fiction here.
Oh boy. Also, I'm here, by the way.
It is here. I haven't just been speaking to the void. I've also been directing some of this at her because it is easier to talk to a person than to talk to nobody. That's another thing is I sort of... This is going to be an informal, not quite an audiobook format, and I welcome the presence of my beloved co-hosts Ada and Taylor as we ride through these gritty and wistful environs together.
I'm lying on a bed.
Taylor's overlying on his bed.
I'm fat. My back hurts.
Taylor says he's fat and his back hurts. You probably heard all that.
If Taylor reads literature, he might die.
He's allergic to it.
Yeah.
He can't.
He's got
do
earplugs in. The AC's on. He's got his favorite book. I mean, no, not a book.
Oh no!
His favorite video game.
It is.
He's beeping and booping over there.
Blood Meridian on SNES.
It's a really, really gritty mod for Oregon Trail. But anyhow, yeah, we may at times make comments or small diversions to discuss certain happenings, making this a true Frankenstein Control experience. But as this is uncharted territory with recording and scheduling, their presence may wax or wane. I was going to go to a pretty important point here. Triggers. This book contains all triggers. I mean nothing less than vivid depictions of casual graphic violence against men, women, children, and animals, as well as most other atrocities you could possibly think of, plus several you'd never come up with. So should we get far enough in this project, when the time comes, I will do my best to reiterate the severity of these events before reading certain passages, so that our listeners may avoid them selectively moving forward. I'll give you a pretty big heads up before scenes that are pretty bad.
Content warning. Blood Meridian.
Yeah, content warning, Blood Meridian. Small bright spot, though. Very, very little rape in this.
Nice.
Almost non-existent. There'll be, in the early section that we're going to be getting to tonight, there'll be a false accusation of it. But there's, other than like 2 sentences that I can think of, there's almost, like, rape is acknowledged as a concept in the book, but there's almost 0 depictions of it.
That's good.
There's far less rape in Blood Meridian than there is in the Game of Thrones books. So there's...
So the chief reason why I never wanted to read or watch it.
Yeah. There's a couple implied sexual assaults, but you're really not going to see any of it.
They're not going to see anything. It's a book, BRI.
Well, yeah. I forgot how it works, Ada. I'm stupid.
We won't be able to see the funny pictures in your brain. You'll have to make your own funny pictures.
Exactly. Imagine funny things as we go along. Try to make this spruce this up however you need to get through it.
Yeah, I'll put a clown in the thumbnail.
The evening honking in the West. A final definitive statement before we begin. The book's whole purpose is to confront this awful truth, but for the sake of plainly saying so, manifest destiny was genocide. Our treatment of the Native Americans was our Holocaust, and we are guilty of it. It was genocide. I'm not going to make any attempts to skirt around the fact. The book certainly doesn't, so it was genocide. This was how.
Yep.
So now, without further ado, Blood Meridian, or The Evening Redness in the West. Also, the first line in the book is, "See the child," so get all of your "destroy the child" energy out now. Alrighty, and we will begin. Chapter 1. See the child. He is pale and thin. He wears a thin and ragged linen shirt. He stokes the scullery fire. Outside lie dark turned fields with rags of snow, and darker woods beyond that harbor yet a few last wolves. His folk are known for hewers of wood and drawers of water, but in truth his father has been a schoolmaster. He lies in drink. He quotes from poets whose names are now lost. The boy crouches by the fire and watches him. Night of your birth, 33. The Leonids they were called. God, how the stars did fall. I looked for blackness, holes in the heavens, the dipper stove. The mother dead these 14 years did incubate in her own bosom the creature who would carry her off. The father never speaks her name, the child does not know it. He has a sister in this world that he will not see again. He watches, pale and unwashed. He can neither read nor write, and in him broods already a taste for mindless violence. All history present in that visage, the child, the father of the man. At 14 he runs away. He will not see again the freezing kitchen house in the pre-dawn dark, the firewood, the washpots. He wanders west as far as Memphis, a solitary migrant upon that flat and pastoral landscape. Blacks in the fields, lank and stooped, their fingers spider-like among the bolls of cotton, a shadowed agony in the garden. Against the sun's declining figures moving in the slower dusk across a paper skyline. A lone dark husbandman pursuing mule and harrow down the rain-blown bottomland toward night. A year later he is in St. Louis. He is taken on for New Orleans aboard a flatboat, 42 days on the river. At night the steamboats hoot and trudge past through the black waters all alight like cities adrift. They break up the float and sell the lumber, and he walks in the streets and hears tongues he has not heard before. He lives in a room above a courtyard behind a tavern, and he comes down at night like some fairy book beast to fight with the sailors. He is not big, but he has big wrists, big hands. His shoulders are set close. The child's face is curiously untouched behind the scars, the eyes oddly innocent. They fight with fists, with feet, with bottles or knives, all races, all breeds. Men whose speech sounds like the grunting of apes. Men from lands so far and queer that standing over them where they lie bleeding in the mud, he feels mankind itself vindicated. On a certain night a Maltese bosun shoots him in the back with a small pistol. Swinging to deal with the man, he is shot again just below the heart. The man flees, and he leans against the bar with the blood running out of his shirt. The others look away. After a while he sits on the floor. He lies in a cot in the room upstairs for 2 weeks while the tavern keeper's wife attends him. She brings his meals, she carries out his slops. A hard-looking woman with a wiry body like a man's. By the time he is mended, he has no money to pay her, and he leaves in the night and sleeps on the riverbank until he can find a boat that will take him on. The boat is going to Texas. Only now is the child finally divested of all that he has been. His origins are become as remote as is his destiny, and not again in all the world's turning will there be terrain so wild and barbarous to try whether the stuff of creation may be shaped to man's will, or whether his own heart is not another kind of clay. The passengers are a different lot. They cage their eyes, and no man asks another what it is that brings him here. He sleeps on the deck, a pilgrim among others. He watches the dim shore rise and fall, gray seabirds squawking, flights of pelicans coastwise above the gray swells. They disembark aboard a lighter, settlers with their chattels, all studying the low coastline, the thin bite of sand and scrub pine swimming in the haze. He walks through the narrow streets of the port. The air smells of salt and new-sawn lumber. At night whores call to him from the dark like souls in want. A week and he is on the move again, a few dollars in his purse that he's earned, walking the sand roads of the southern night alone, his hands balled in the cotton pockets of his cheap coat. Earthen causeways cross the marshland, egrets in their rookeries white as candles among the moss. The wind has a raw edge to it, and the leaves lope by the roadside and skelter on in the night fields. He moves through the small settlements and farms, working for day wages and found. He sees a parricide hanged in a crossroads hamlet, and the man's friends run forward and pull his legs, and he hangs dead from his rope while urine darkens his trousers. He works in a sawmill. He works in a diphtheria pest house. He takes his pay from a farmer, an aged mule, and aback this animal in the spring of the year 1849. He rides up through the latter-day Republic of Fredonia into the town of Nacogdoches. The Reverend Green had been playing to a full house daily as long as the rain had been falling, and the rain had been falling for 2 weeks. When the kid ducked into the ratty canvas tent, there was standing room along the walls, a place or two, and such a heady reek of the wet and bathless that they themselves would sally forth into the downpour now again for fresh air before the rain drove them back in again. He stood with others of his kind along the back wall. The only thing that might have distinguished him in that crowd was that he was not armed. "Neighbors," said the Reverend, "he couldn't stay out of these here hell holes right here in Nacogdoches. I said to him, said, 'You gonna take the Son of God in there with you?' And he said, 'Oh, no, I ain't.' And I said, 'Don't you know what he said? I will follow you always, even until the end of the road.' Well, he said, 'I ain't asking nobody to go nowheres.' And I said, 'Neighbor, you don't need to ask. He's a-going to be there with you every step of the way, whether you ask it or whether you don't.' I said, 'Neighbor, you can't get shed of him. Now, are you going to drag him into that hell-hole yonder?" You ever see such a place for rain? The kid had been watching the Reverend. He turned to the man who spoke. He wore long mustaches after the fashion of teamsters, and he wore a wide-brimmed hat with a low round crown. He was slightly wall-eyed, and he was watching the kid earnestly, as if he'd know his opinion about the rain. "I just got here," said the kid. "Well, it beats all I ever seen." The kid nodded. An enormous man dressed in an oilcloth slicker had entered the tent and removed his hat. He was bald as a stone, and he had no trace of beard, and no brows to his eyes, nor lashes to them. He was close on to 7 feet in height, and he stood smoking a cigar even in this nomadic house of God, and he seemed to have removed his hat only to chase the rain from it, and now he put it on again. The Reverend had stopped his sermon altogether. There was no sound in the tent. All watched the man. He adjusted the hat and then pushed his way forward as far as the crate-board pulpit where the Reverend stood, and there he turned to address the Reverend's congregation. His face was serene and strangely childlike. His hands were small. He held them out. "Ladies and gentlemen, I feel it is my duty to inform you that the man holding this revival is an impostor. He holds no papers of divinity from any institution recognized or improvised. He is altogether devoid of the least qualification to the office he has usurped, and has only committed to memory a few passages from the good book for the purpose of lending to his fraudulent sermons some faint flavor of the piety he despises. In truth, the gentleman standing here before you, posing as a minister of the Lord, is not only totally illiterate, but is also wanted by the law in the states of Tennessee, Kentucky, Mississippi, and Arkansas." "Oh, God!" cried the Reverend. "Lies! Lies!" He began reading feverishly from his open Bible. "On a variety of charges, the most recent of which involved a girl of 11 years, I said 11, who had come to him in trust and whom he was surprised in the act of violating while actually clothed in the livery of his own God." A moan swept through the crowd. A lady sank to her knees. "This is him!" cried the Reverend, sobbing. "This is him! The devil! Here he stands!" "Let's hang the turd!" called an ugly thug from the gallery to the rear. Not 3 weeks before this, he was run out of Fort Smith, Arkansas for having congress with a goat. Yes, lady, that is what I said, goat. Why, damn my eyes if I won't shoot the son of a bitch, said a man rising on the far side of the tent, and drawing a pistol from his boot, he leveled it and fired. The young teamster instantly produced a knife from his clothing and unseamed the tent and stepped outside into the rain. The kid followed. They ducked low and ran across the mud toward the hotel. Already gunfire was general within the tent, and a dozen exits had been hacked through the canvas walls, and people were pouring out, women screaming, folks stumbling, folk trampled underfoot in the mud. The kid and his friend the teamster reached the hotel gallery and wiped the water from their eyes and turned to watch. As they did so, the tent began to sway and buckle, and like a huge and wounded Medusa, it slowly settled to the ground, trailing tattered canvas walls and ratty guy ropes over the ground. The bald-headed man was already at the bar when they entered. On the polished wood before him were 2 hats and a double handful of coins. He raised his glass, but not to them. They stood up to the bar and ordered whiskeys, and the kid laid his money down, but the barman pushed it back with his thumb and nodded. "These here is on the judge," he said. They drank. The teamster set his glass down and looked at the kid, or he seemed to. You couldn't be sure of his gaze. The kid looked down the bar to where the judge stood. The bar was that tall that not every man could get his elbows up on it, but it came just to the judge's waist, and he stood with his hands placed flatwise in the wood, leaning slightly, as if about to give another address. By now men were piling through the doorway, bleeding, covered in mud and cursing. They gathered about the judge. A posse was being drawn to pursue the preacher. "Judge, how did you come to have the goods on that no account?" "Goods?" said the judge. "When was you in Fort Smith?" "Fort Smith? Where did you know him to know all that stuff on him? You mean the Reverend Green?" "Yes, sir. I reckoned you was in Fort Smith before you come out here." "I was never in Fort Smith in my life. Doubt that he was." They looked from one to the other. "Well, where was it you run up on him?" "I never laid eyes on the man before today. Never even heard of him." He raised his glass and drank. There was a strange silence in the room. The men looked like mud effigies. Finally someone began to laugh. Then another. Soon they were all laughing together. Someone bought the judge a drink. It had been raining for 16 days when he met Toadvine, and it was raining yet. He was still standing in the same saloon, and he had drunk up all his money save $2. The teamster had gone. The room was all but empty. The door stood open, and you could see the rain falling in the empty lot behind the hotel. He drained his glass and went out. There were boards laid across the mud, and he followed the paling band of door light down towards the battered jakes at the bottom of the lot. Another man was coming up from the jakes, and they met halfway on the narrow planks. The man before him swayed slightly. His wet hat brim fell to his shoulders, save in the front where it was pinned back. He held a bottle loosely in one hand. "You better get out of my way," he said. The kid wasn't going to do that, and he saw no use in discussing it. He kicked the man in the jaw. The man went down and got up again. He said, "I'm going to kill you." He swung with the bottle, and the kid ducked, and he swung again, and the kid stepped back. When the kid hit him, the man shattered the bottle against the side of his head. He went off the boards into the mud, and the man lunged after him with a jagged bottleneck and tried to stick it in his eye. The kid was fending with his hands, and they were slick with blood. He kept trying to reach into his boot for his knife. "Kill your ass," the man said. They slogged about in the dark of the lot, coming out of their boots. The kid had got his knife now, and as they circled crabwise, the man lurched at him, and he cut the man's shirt open. The man threw down the bottleneck and unsheathed an immense bowie knife from behind his neck. His hat had come off, and his black ropey locks swung about his head, and he had codified his threats to the one word "kill" like a crazed chant. "Latin's cut," said one of several men standing along the walkway watching. "Kill, kill," slobbered the man wading forward. But someone else was coming down the lot, great steady sucking sounds like a cow. He was carrying a huge shillelagh. He reached the kid first, and when he swung with the club, the kid went face down in the mud. He'd have died if someone hadn't turned him over. When he woke, it was daylight, and the rain had stopped, and he was looking up into the face of a man with long hair who was completely covered in mud. The man was saying something to him. "What?" said the kid. "I said, are you quits?" "Quits?" "Quits, 'cause if you want some more of me, you sure as hell going to get it." He looked at the sky. Very high, very small, a buzzard. He looked at the man. "Is my neck broke?" he said. The man looked out over the lot and spat and looked at the boy again. "Can you not get up?" "I don't know. I ain't tried." "I never meant to break your neck." "No, I meant to kill you." "They ain't nobody done it yet." He clawed at the mud and pushed himself up. The man was sitting on the planks with his boots alongside him. "There ain't nothing wrong with you," he said. The kid looked about stiffly at the day. "Where's my boots?" he said. The man squinted at him. Flakes of dried mud fell from his face. "I'm going to have to kill some son of a bitch if they got my boots. Yonder looks like one of them." The kid labored off through the mud and fetched up one boot. He slogged about in the yard, feeling likely lumps of mud. "This your knife?" he said. The man squinted at him. "Looks like it," he said. The kid pitched it to him, and he bent and picked it up and wiped the huge blade on his trouser leg. "Thought somebody done stole you," he told the knife. The kid found his other boot and came and sat on the boards. His hands were huge with mud, and he wiped one of them briefly at his knee and let it fall again. They sat there side by side, looking out across the barren lot. There was a picket fence at the edge of the lot, and beyond the fence a boy was drawing water at the well, and there were chickens in the yard there. A man came from the dram shop door down the walk towards the outhouse. He stopped where they sat and looked at them, and then stepped off into the mud. After a while he came back and stepped off into the mud again and went around up the walk. The kid looked at the man. His head was strangely narrow, and his hair was plastered up with mud in a bizarre and primitive coiffure. On his forehead were burned the letters H.T., and lower and almost between the eyes the letter F, and these markings were splayed and garish as if the iron had been left too long. When he turned to look at the kid could see that he had no ears. He stood up and sheathed the knife and started up the walk with the boots in his hand, and the kid rose and followed. Halfway to the hotel, the man stopped and looked out at the mud, and then sat down on the planks and pulled on the boots, mud and all. Then he rose and slogged off through the lot to pick something up. "I want you to look here," he said, "at my goddamn hat." You couldn't tell what it was, something dead. He flapped it about and pulled it over his head and went on, and the kid followed. The dram house was a long, narrow hall wainscoted with varnished boards. There were tables by the wall and spittoons on the floor. There were no patrons. The barman looked up when they entered, and a racist term that had been sweeping the floor stood the broom against the wall and went out. "Where's Sidney?" said the man in his suit of mud. "In the bed, I reckon." They went on. "Toadvine," called the barman. The kid looked back. The barman had come behind the bar and was looking after them. They crossed from the door through the lobby of the hotel towards the stairs, leaving varied forms of mud behind them on the floor. As they started up the stairs, the clerk at the desk leaned and called out to them, "Toadvine." He stopped and looked back. "He'll shoot you." "Old Sidney?" "Old Sidney." They went on up the stairs. At the top of the landing was a long hall with a window light at the end. There were varnished doors down the wall, set so close they might have been closets. Toadvine went on until he came to the end of the hall. He listened at the last door and eyed the kid. "You got a match?" The kid searched his pockets and came up with a crushed and stained wooden box. The man took it from him. "Need a little tinder here," he said. He was crumbling the box and stacking the bits against the door. He struck a match and set the pieces alight. He pushed the little pile of burning wood under the door and added more matches. "Is he in there?" said the boy. "That's what we're fixing to see." A dark curl of smoke rose, a blue flame of burning varnish. They squatted in the hallway and watched. Thin flames began to run up over the panels and dart back again. The watchers looked like forms excavated from a bog. "Tap on the door now," said Toadvine. The kid rose. Toadvine stood up and waited. They could hear the flames crackling inside the room. The kid tapped. "You better tap louder than that. This man drinks some." He balled his fist and lambasted the door about 5 times. "Hellfire!" said a voice. "Here he comes." They waited. "You hot son of a bitch!" said the voice. Then the knob turned and the door opened. He stood in his underwear, holding in one hand the towel he'd used to turn the doorknob with, and when he saw them he turned and started back into the room, but Toadvine seized him about the neck and rode him to the floor, and held him by the hair and began to pry out an eyeball with his thumb. The man grabbed his wrist and bit it. "Kick his mouth in," called Toadvine. "Kick it!" The kid stepped past him into the room and turned and kicked the man in the face. Toadvine held his head back by the hair. "Kick him," he called. "Oh, kick him, honey." He kicked. Toadvine pulled the bloody head around and looked at it and let it flop to the floor, and then he rose and kicked the man himself. 2 spectators were standing in the hallway. The door was completely afire, and part of the wall and ceiling. They went out and down the hall. The clerk was coming up the steps 2 at a time. "Toadvine, you son of a bitch!" Toadvine was 4 steps above him, and when he kicked him, he caught him in the throat. The clerk sat down on the stairs. When the kid came down past him, he hit him in the side of the head, and the clerk slumped over and began to slide towards the landing. The kid stepped over him and went down the lobby and crossed to the front door and out. Toadvine was running down the street, waving his fists above his head crazily and laughing. He looked like a great clay voodoo doll made animate, and the kid looked like another. Behind them, flames were licking at the top corner of the hotel, and clouds of dark smoke rose into the warm Texas morning. He'd left the mule with a Mexican family that boarded animals at the edge of town, and he arrived there wild-looking and out of breath. The woman opened the door and looked at him. "Need to get my mule," he wheezed. She looked at him some more, and then she called toward the back of the house. He walked around. There were horses tethered in the lot, and there was a flatbed wagon against the fence with some turkeys sitting on the edge looking out. The old lady had come out the back door again. "Nido," she called. "Venga. Hay un caballero aquí. Venga." He went down the shed towards the tack room, got his wretched saddle and his blanket roll, and brought them back. He found the mule and unstalled it, and bridled it with the rawhide hackamore, and led it to the fence. He leaned against the animal with his shoulder and got the saddle over it and got it cinched. The mule started shying and running its head along the fence. He led it across the lot. The mule kept shaking its head sideways as if it had something in its ear. He led it out to the road. As he passed the house, the woman came padding out after him. When she saw him put his foot in the stirrup, she began to run. He swung up into the broken saddle and chucked the mule forward. She stopped at the gate and watched him go. He didn't look back. When he passed back through the town, the hotel was burning and men were standing around watching it, some holding empty buckets. A few men sat horseback watching the flames, and one of these was the judge. As the kid rode past, the judge turned and watched him. He turned his horse, too, as if he'd have the animal watch. When the kid looked back, the judge smiled. The kid touched up the mule, and they went sucking out past the old stone fort along the road west.
All right.
I figure that's a good stopping point for tonight.
Yeah.
What you think so far?
Pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah.
Just all this mischief and mayhem, basically.
Yeah.
But it's gonna get real dark.
Yeah, it's gonna get real. Right now, it actually kind of starts funny.
Yeah.
Just them beating up that random guy.
Yeah. Oh, we're gonna set a door on fire. Go, go, man.
Yeah. It's funny because Toadvine comes back later as a member of the gang, and he and the kid are sort of friends at that point, and it's like they befriend each other by kicking the shit out of each other.
Yeah.
And it's just like...
Back then, men were men.
Yeah. And just the kid gets to a knockdown, drag-out fight with them. They almost kill each other, and then he just helps the guy immediately beat up somebody else and then burn down a house.
And then a whole shenanigans with the judge tricking everybody into thinking the guy was a
perv,
a criminal.
Yeah.
Just to like steal from him, basically. And they're like, oh.
Yeah. They realize if they don't laugh, it'll look like they were made fools of.
Yeah.
So.
And who's going to mess with a guy that looks like that?
Yeah.
Horrible golem of a man.
He really is. That was the first 3 chapters of Blood Meridian.
Also, didn't the Reverend Green call him the devil? Yeah. Guess that's foreshadowing?
Yep.
From what you've told me about this book, at least.
Yeah, that's pretty heavy. There he is, the devil.
Yeah.
Kind of like,
Matthew, it's the devil.
Oh, thank God. It was actually the devil this time.
Well, that was installment 1 of however many... How many pages would that be, Rye?
It's nowhere near as long as, like, the Stormlight book. So
yeah,
it's like
it doesn't look too bad.
No.
It was like 350 pages.
And we could do much longer sessions had we not just done a podcast recording.
Yeah.
So, like, if people like this, I could come over on a Saturday and do it sometime or something.
That could be nice. Yeah, maybe I'll just do this every other week, or
yeah,
maybe every week if you want to come in and put in the overtime.
We'll see how people like the first installment, and if they want more, we'll take it from there.
Yeah.
Vector Man is hard.
You heard it here first, folks. Vector Man is hard.
That's hard.
Good night, everybody.
Now even you know I am a menace. I hand you the secrets to save the entire human race and the entire universe.